Hello, and welcome to the Project Elected podcast. Project Elect is a nonpartisan nonprofit whose goal is pretty simple. We want to get more Latter-day Saint women involved in public service. On this podcast, we interview amazing Latter-day Saint women who are involved in public service. Hi, my name is Audrey Perry-Martin. I'm the founder of Project Elect and the host of this podcast. Hi, everybody. I am excited to be here today with Lori Spruance. She is running for Utah Senate. She's in the 24th district, and I'm going to ask her all about that. But she also is a BYU professor and many other hats. So I'm excited to talk to her and hear her story today. Thank you for joining me today, Lori.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited to be here today.
So, Lori, tell me about yourself. Is this the first office you've run for? What has made you get to the point where you're running for Senate in Utah?
I have not run for office before, and running for Senate, I was thinking, wow, this is like a big leap to not having a seat before. You think you need to create this series of stepping stones, like start at city council or school board, and then maybe House, and then maybe Senate. And that all got flipped on its head when someone challenged that paradigm for me. And I thought, you're right. You don't have to follow some sort of path or stepping stone in order to see. I think we've seen that with a variety of different elected officials, but maybe sometimes as women, we think that there needs to be this specific order that we have to follow. And so I was really grateful that someone challenged that paradigm for me. So first time running and running for a state Senate seat.
I love that you brought up that you don't really have to do it in a certain order, because I think a lot of people, men and women, think, you've got to pay your dues. And sometimes you'll run into people in politics who will be like, you didn't pay your dues. Why are you running for this higher office? And that's ridiculous. If you look at a lot of people in really high office, they didn't have elected jobs before this. You don't have to be a career politician. And I love the idea of people just serving and deciding where their talents could be best used and running for office and serving for a few terms and then turning it over to somebody else. So we don't have this career politician establishment all the time, and we can get some fresh blood in there. Tell me what made you decide you wanted to run for Senate.
Running for an elected office was something that I've thought about for several years, actually. In Utah, there is a series called the Political Development Series, and I took that course that was offered several years ago. So again, to have paid money to do this course, clearly it was something that had been on my mind. But really just finding what seemed to fit best for, like you mentioned, my skill set, my interests, my passions, where I think I could best serve, really came down to this Senate seat. I've worked over the years with a handful of elected officials through my career on some state policy. And so I always was really interested in more of the state level stuff, again, because of my expertise. And I'm sure we'll dive into that at some point through my career. And I also was interested in electability. I think it's fantastic for individuals who choose to run to be another person and choice on the ballot. I think there's a lot of value in that, but I am interested in winning. I'm interested in serving. And so really looking at the demographics of my area, it made a lot more sense to run for the Senate seat versus the House seat. And so it really was about my skill set, my interests, being able to serve at the state level, and then looking at the path for victory potentially. And that really is what led me to say, look, the Senate seat is it versus the House seat.
So what is your district? What is the area that you're running to represent?
My district covers part of Orem and then a large portion of Provo, which includes BYU, the area surrounding BYU. So any listeners who are familiar, it's like the BYU area and then everything northeast of that. It includes where I work and also, of course, where I live.
That's my hometown. I'm from Orem, so you'd probably be my parents'
yes, probably
parents' district, right? So you're running as an independent. I'd love to talk a little bit about that and what led you to decide to run as an independent candidate as opposed to a party candidate.
It's certainly an interesting decision, and there's some challenges associated with it, but also I think some really unique opportunities associated with it. And honestly, that was one of the reasons that held me back from running for some time is the partisan politics can be challenging, and I understand there's a variety of reasons why people people run through parties and those sorts of things. They provide a lot of resources, which is fantastic. But I also know there's a lot of folks who are dissatisfied with the party system, feeling like they don't have a camp or a home. And I think that's a lot of my district. We saw a lot of success in the past in the presidential election, as well as the Senate seats, federal seat for Evan McMullen, who ran as an independent. And so I think there is some appetite for that. And really, it felt true to my value system. I felt like this doesn't feel like I have to compromise any of my personal values to try and fit into one box or another. And like I said, I feel like there's an opportunity for electability. And so once I was presented with these data, like an independent could have success in my district, it felt right to my values. I was like, then we should give it a go. We should try it this way.
And that's a good point you raise, is you run as an independent, you can run what you really believe. Whereas I do think some politicians sometimes feel like they have to toe the party line, even if that's not really where they want to come from. And there's certainly a lot of people in the country right now who feel like neither party is really representing them. There's lots of polls that say people don't feel like they fit perfectly in either box, Republican or Democrat. And so independence, it's hard to run as a third party or independent candidate because the party system we have is really strong, as I know you know. But I say kudos to you for being willing to do it and giving people another option besides maybe these party boxes they don't feel like they fit in.
One other thing I wanted to mention too that I think has been something that I've been able to really stand for in terms of my platform is the ability to say, I don't have to choose based on party lines. I can choose based on what my constituents are saying. And so I think that is such an important thing that sometimes gets lost in politics right now because of like the camps that you are supposed to belong in or have to. And I think sometimes the constituent can feel like their voice doesn't matter because there's like a playbook, so to speak, that other candidates may have to align to. So again, there are challenges, but I think there's a lot of strengths and opportunities in this strategy too.
I also want to talk about your background because you have a really interesting background. You teach at BYU. Tell me about what you teach and what your professional career has been like up to now.
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, it's one of the things that motivated me to run as well was I am a professor in public health with primarily a focus on community health. So I know when we say public health, a lot of people are going to jump into the COVID thing. I'm not an infectious disease specialist, though couch myself as like an expert in community health, which I think of as like the places people live, work, and play. And so really the environment surrounding those is really my expertise. In fact, most of my expertise is in schools. So I have decades of experience in school-based research, thinking about school initiatives, how we can work with schools and or use the school to provide like the best quality of life for kids. So that's really where most of my expertise lies. This connects back to public policy because most of the work that I do is related to school meal programs. So thinking about school lunch, school breakfast, those sorts of things, which are federal programs and also state level programs, depending on how they're funded and operated, of course. And so I worked real closely with a handful of legislators over the years on some public policy in Utah related to school meals. At one point, not that of course, I'm an expert in anything, but I thought, I could be the one drafting these policies instead of being the one saying, maybe you should consider this or maybe you should do that. And I really just was motivated by the fact that there is, to me, especially in Utah, a lack of expertise in a variety of different areas. And I think we need all types of people in office. And in Utah, primarily, we're dominated in our legislature by real estate developers. In fact, I think somewhat 70% of our elected officials in Utah have their hand in real estate development. And of course, that's important, but there is so many other topics and expertise areas that we need our elected officials to have to provide a different perspective on some of the most critical and important issues. So yeah, that's a little bit about my professional background. And I've worked at BYU for 8 years. And prior to that, I was up at Utah State. And so I've been in the area working with folks in Utah related to child nutrition and child wellness for almost the last decade.
That's really cool. I can't believe that statistic that like 70% of elected state legislators are real estate developers. Nothing against real estate developers, but that's crazy. You talked a little bit about issues you care about. Have you had any experiences while you're running for office that kind of affirm that what you're doing is consistent with your divine potential? Or as you're praying about it, have you felt like, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do? Or is it maybe you haven't gotten the feeling you're not supposed to do it? How did that work for you?
I do think it's one of those things that was like line upon line, so to speak. Like it wasn't this big magical moment. It's something that I've thought about for years and been thoughtful for years about. And then when presented with an opportunity that like this election, this time, these issues all just sat down in front of me, and it was like, now's the time. And it was so much work after that. And I do think sometimes running for office can or needs to be like that because of seizing an opportunity, so to speak. I think oftentimes, at least for me, we want to plan everything in advance and like maybe in 2028 or maybe in 2030 or whatever the date is, that's the right time. And I think that's what I was doing previously, like, oh, now's not the right time. But again, once I was approached by an outside organization who suggested that I should consider running. And I really think part of that was because they were looking for someone to run as an independent in the district that I was in. I was not probably the first person that they reached out to. I'm sure that they had a strategy. And I was the one who said, yes, let's do it. And I often think it's because I agreed and I felt inspired in that exact moment to say, this is what I want to do. In fact, of course, I thought about it for a couple of days, but once it all was presented to me and the information, I was like, absolutely, this is the right path forward, even though there were a lot of obstacles in the way, so to speak.
That's cool because I think a lot of times women immediately say, no, oh no, I couldn't do that. And we need to pause and think about it and pray about it and then figure out if this is the opportunity, because those opportunities, like you said, they can come really quick and you weren't planning for it. And I'm a planner and you want to have your life laid out, and certainly running for Senate in Utah is going to upend a lot of things in your life. And so I think that that's great. And I wish more women would be willing to wait it out and think about it and pray about it and then say yes.
And I think part of it for me had to years of having to get over the ideas or challenges that I was struggling with. It wasn't a date like this will happen on this date, but I think, of course, I had concerns about what type of negativity might come out of this or challenges that I'm not anticipating, or the list could go on and on, I'm sure. But one of the things, too, was feeling like, what happens if you lose? And finally, I just got over myself and said, hopefully there's always a loser, because if there's not, that means we haven't had a good democracy to have multiple choices as individuals. And of course, that's not the outcome I want. I'm going to work hard to ensure that it's not just a losing campaign. But I finally had to tell myself there's nothing wrong with losing. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean anything other than you didn't win the election.
And a lot of candidates lose their first time. That's so common.
Exactly.
And whether you run it again or not, you certainly learn a lot from the process.
So much. So eventually it was just like, it's not about winning or losing. There's a handful of different things to learn across the way, and it's fine, whatever the outcome is. It doesn't have any sort of value on me as an individual, as a child of God. That doesn't matter.
And it sounds like you had kind of prepared your heart and mind too. You'd taken courses, you'd thought about it. And so it wasn't like it came out of the blue. You'd already told yourself, yes, one day I'm going to run for office.
Yes,
and
100%.
Sometimes that shock of, oh, it's now, makes people say no. It's better to say yes. It's probably time if the time is right. So running for office, how is it compared to what you expected? What has been easier or harder than you thought it would be?
I think the hardest part for me has felt like there's always more you can do. And so having to learn how to give yourself grace and take breaks from time to time, because you literally can be doing something all the time for a campaign. Phone calls, emails, events, going to other events, trying to get your name out there, that sort of thing. And so that has been probably the hardest for me is having to differentiate what's important to go to and when is the time to focus on the campaign versus when is the time to focus on my career or my family or those sorts of things. So that has been challenging of trying to like now navigate this sort of thing, because from a career perspective, I usually am like, look, 9 to 5, I come home. Sure, if I have an email for a student to answer in the evening or something, that's fine. But I'm not often like working on the weekends or that sort of thing. I've done very well in my career to compartmentalize that. And so now I'm adding this new thing in that is often more evenings and weekends and thinking about, okay, how do I navigate that sort of thing? So that's been hard. The thing that's actually been really rewarding, it's also challenging, but also really rewarding, is the fundraising piece. And I think why that has been such a rewarding aspect of it is just feeling like there are so many people willing to invest time and money, sometimes a lot of to support you. And sometimes it's why me? And I'm like, I am the candidate that they believe in right now. And that has been so rewarding. And so far have had a fairly successful fundraising campaign in the campaign. And I always say, you always hope and wish there's more. And I'm always so, so grateful for the people who have generously donated. And even sometimes $5 when that is something that someone chose to spend their money on helping me succeed. So that's been really rewarding. In fact, before we hopped on, once a week, I write thank you letters or note cards to everyone who's donated. And I keep having to buy more and more note cards. And it's just been so great. I've just been so grateful for those who have decided to invest in me.
That's amazing. I love that way of thinking of fundraising and just being appreciative that people are willing to invest in you and that you're the one they want to win for this cycle, and having it be not a guilt thing that, oh, they're giving me their money, but they want to. And I wish in our culture it was more common to give to political candidates, because a lot of times people in our church don't really think to give to political candidates a lot.
For sure.
It's not something that's natural for them.
Another thing I've learned is I'm like, okay, I now, from regardless of the outcome, here moving forward, every election cycle, I am choosing one or multiple to invest in, even if it's just a small amount, because it does matter, and it matters so much to the person running, and it matters a lot to running a successful campaign, for sure. And I think just speaking about that, something that people don't realize is that the early investment in a campaign is much more important than a donation in October. So if you think you're going to, and again, this isn't a pitch for me, but if you think you're going to donate to a candidate at some point, it can make the difference of them remaining in the race if it happens early on.
Yeah, that's so true. I teach campaign finance law at BYU Law School, and I always talk about how early money is the most important. It makes a lot bigger difference to a candidate than money at the very end of the cycle. That maybe not needed. Yeah,
exactly. It's needed now when I'm buying signs, when I'm printing mailers, like when I'm thinking about a strategy on if I'm going to use social media, paid ads, or all of that matters, and it's decisions based on earlier money than what happens in October. In fact, October is sometimes too late. I will obviously, anyone candidate would still take money through October, but it really is important to think about it happening early. And so that's one thing that I've learned from this is in the future, I will donate early and more frequently than I have in the past.
That's great. I try to do that too. You got to remember to do it. And you got to remember to do it even maybe sometimes before you're asked if you believe in a candidate to give them a donation. So have you confronted much of the negative side of campaigning, either on social media or people you've met with being negative or rude? And if so, how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, I don't think I've gotten to that point yet, fortunately, but I know it's coming. I'm sure it's coming. I have heard from folks in the past that the Republican challenger in my race, he will run an aggressive campaign, which may include some negativity. So I don't feel like I've experienced that yet, but I'm sure it's coming. And I have just continued to try and prepare myself mentally for knowing that will happen. And that is just how some campaigns run. I wish we had cleaner politics sometimes, but there is some research evidence that suggests that negative campaigning is a successful strategy. So I know it's going to happen, or I assume, I shouldn't say no. And I just have really tried to continue to tell myself that this is just part of the game. I used to play sports growing up. Trash talking is part of the game sometimes. And I'm just prepared that it may happen. And I'm sure I will have days that I feel really terrible about that when it happens. And fortunately, I feel like I've got a great group of people that I can lean on who, again, it doesn't matter about the winning, but folks who can remind you of like your worth and you're more than what XYZ said about you or that sort of thing.
How did you gather your team? How did you get a group of people to help with your campaign and people you could trust and you knew would actually be dedicated to the cause?
Yeah, honestly, it's been through what I think a lot of women are engaged with, book club groups and folks that we were having frequent discussions about politics in Utah and things that were happening for years. And I had also told them for years, well, I think about running. And they were always like, we would love it if you would, And so there are folks that I've just known for years who knew that this was something I was considering doing. And, I reach out to them. I'm like, what can you tell me? Like, remind me, hopefully we have our own knowledge of our own self-worth. Every now and then it's great to reach out to someone to remind me why you're doing this or like why this matters or why this is important, because through the ins and outs of I spend probably 8 hours a week calling people about letting them know about who I am and of course looking for donations and getting my name out there. And it can, like, the weeds of a campaign can be really discouraging at times. And so just being able to step back and remind yourself why you're doing this and also reach out to your network to help remind you why you're doing this has been important. In this political development series class that I took years ago, one thing we had to do as an exercise was reach out to 10 or 20 people in our network and say, why do you think I would be a good candidate for office? And so I just have those tucked away and I just read through those occasionally on the days that it's feeling a lot harder than the days that are not. And I just read through those and say, look, these are some good qualities that I have and why someone would be interested in me. So those are some of the ways that I've gotten through some of those tough times and why my network's been helpful and important.
I like that you contacted people and asked them why you would be a good candidate and made them write it down. I mean, that a lot of times we can't see ourselves as clearly as others can see us. And I bet those are really helpful to boost your self-confidence and realize you are a good candidate and what other people see in you that maybe you didn't know in yourself. Was that how it worked or what was...
Yep. And it wasn't, like I said, I can't take the credit for it. It was an exercise that I had to do as part of this series, a homework assignment, so to speak. And I did it because I thought this is probably an important exercise to do. And I was really grateful to have that, to have some of those insights that I can draw back on from years ago,
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some good traits that you think you have or that are good to be an elected official? Why do you think you've got the skill set and the desire to do this?
Yeah, so I feel like there's hard skills and then there's soft skills, right? So some of the hard skills that I feel that are important are a lot from my research background. I think one thing that is important and sometimes missed in politics these days is like the evidence based around a policy. Sometimes it's more of, is it popular or is it part of the party's priorities or is it part of some sort of culture war that the left or right are trying to fight? And I really feel that my expertise in research, conducting scientific studies, knowing the evidence is really helpful. Of course, I don't know the evidence on every single topic under the sun, but I have a really strong network, of course, of folks who are experts in a variety of different areas that make policy recommendations all of the time. And it just goes into the void of no one listening. And so I think that is one really important thing that I am very interested in. And part of my background is in program evaluations, evaluating programs, seeing how they operate. Are they making a difference in outcomes? Are they cost effective? I think those are just such valuable, critical skills in terms of government policy, because we want to be able to evaluate if programs are working. And if they are, worth the taxpayer dollars, those sorts of things. So I think those are some hard skills that I will bring to the table that are incredibly valuable. Another thing that I think is important from like a soft skills type of thing is I feel like I'm a pretty good listener. Of course, I work with students all the time. And at BYU is interesting because we act in a different mentorship role. So I am working with students a lot, learning about their personal lives and the things that they're struggling with and like career questions, those sorts of things. And I think that is incredibly valuable in terms of listening. And one thing that in preparation for this, I wanted to do was reread my patriarchal blessing. And it talks frequently in there about one of my gifts is the gift for learning and for understanding. And I do think that's a strength of mine, is trying to learn and to understand. And it's been so important over this campaign because folks will ask me questions about something that I'm maybe unfamiliar with. For example, I'm not like a small business policy guru, but it has been an incredible opportunity for me to say, I don't know a lot about that, but I can go back and learn about it and read to understand. And that doesn't mean I'm going to be an expert in all of those things, but I love to learn and I love to understand. And I think that those are two really valuable skills on the soft side to bring as a policymaker.
Those are great skills and great skills to have as a state Senate member. And I especially like the research because even though you're not an expert on everything, you know how to do research, right? You know how to find evidence and evidence-based and legitimate studies and legitimate evidence. And I think that's really invaluable these days because there's so much information and a lot of it's terrible.
Right.
It's not high quality, right?
No,
and so to have a professor who actually makes research of her own and does research on her own and can say, no, this is bogus, this is ridiculous for various things, I think would be helpful in any state legislature.
Yes.
We are running out of time. I did want to ask you if you had an invitation for our listeners. We always end with something they can do, a step they can take in the very near future to help them come closer to running for office or getting more involved in public service.
Oh, I think there's so many things. Volunteering in a campaign, and I don't think that means you have to believe or know all of the things because a candidate will help you get there. Volunteer, consider making a donation to a campaign. And then I also like thinking about, in this process has something been for me, we've heard this phrase before, do something every day that scares you. And I don't think it has to be every day, but I think maybe step one place closer into an arena that might feel somewhat uncomfortable to you. Maybe that's a conversation with a neighbor about a local initiative that's happening. And I don't think it means you have to be the expert on all of those things, but you can have a conversation with a neighbor. I think sometimes within our culture, we have been taught that discussing politics is contentious. And sometimes, of course, it is contentious, but I don't think it has to be that way. So I think maybe stepping out of your comfort zone to have conversations with friends, family members, or getting involved in some capacity, whether that's volunteering to serve on a board in your city or a nonprofit or really any way that kind of like steps you closer to any sort of public service. So this idea, I don't think has to be scary, but maybe something that would stretch yourself a little bit more. This has been an incredibly stretching experience for me, and I think it makes us better people to stretch ourselves in ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Thank you so much, Lori, for talking to us today and for sharing your story. It's been really fun getting to know you a little bit, and good luck for the rest of your campaign.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you all for listening to the Project Elected podcast. For free resources and materials, head over to projectelectwomen.org. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as Project Elect Women. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate us, or give us a review on iTunes. So until next time, thank you.